Hi, Pam.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing well, thanks.
Good, good.
Hey, Pam.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How you doing?
Good, good, tired.
Yes. Working on the same project that you talked about last week?
Yes, yeah, I'll be there for maybe another week.
Well, that's good. Yeah, give it just a minute. We'll start up. While we're waiting for others to join, I'll call your attention to the chat box at the bottom. Feel free to ask questions. We've got people monitoring the chat box. Questions always welcome. If you haven't found your way yet onto Slack, it's a business platform, and we've set one up just for these discussions. A great way to ask a question or have a comment, maybe even think about something that we covered the night before, or keeping up with the reading. You can ask questions about the Office of Shaman. For those that don't know, you can find an audio copy or audio chapters of the Office of Shaman on an application program called SoundCloud. Or you can find it on Amazon.
What's up, Ken? What's up, guys?
Hello, Ralph. How you doing?
Not too bad. It's that time of night.
Welcome back, Ralph.
Well, we're going to be talking about the tool of programming tonight.
Good tool.
Tool of programming. And it has occurred to me that we're in the midst of a conversation that's happening. I mean, we're in the midst of a conversation, ladies and gentlemen. But it's also occurred to me that we're always in the midst of a conversation. And I think back to the years I've spent doing this work, using these tools. And I can see, we're always in the midst of a conversation. Whether we like it or not, we're having a conversation now. We're engaged in conversations with our friends, our significant others, and our community. And really the question becomes, do we know what is being said? I got another one for you. Do you even know what you're saying? really interesting question, right? Doesn't that sound kind of a little bit off the wall that I'd asked the question, do you know what you're saying? Well, I will tell you that at every corner that I've done this work, I've found myself and the people that do it that are really surprised about just what they're saying or even what the other person is saying. Don't take my word for it. You'll just hang in there and you'll see. For me, programming was a real surprise. I mean, it was a surprise. I had heard about it. I knew about neural programming. I knew some people in my community that are doing, hypnotism and neuro-linguistic programming and all mantras and various tools and stuff. But until you develop a skill set to take a look at your own programming, you're kind of blind. I don't think I stand out as being anything different than everybody else. Now, here's the part that always just really surprises me. You can't see the programming that you use to look at the world. So here's someone like me. I come from a typical upbringing, and I grew up in Queens before moving to Long Island. I come from a family where my parents got divorced when I was really young, and there was a lot of fighting. They were teenagers, and I'm watching the world just like all of you have done, kind of witnessing what's on when you're figuring out what's what, who your parents are or who people are or who you are. Or how about this one, how you get along with people. And so I came to see that my model of, what people were doing, let's say, for example, how men and women got along, for instance, was not one that matched really what was going on. I had a mom that went through a tough divorce, and my dad went through a tough divorce, and they protected their kids. And, I came out pretty much like coddled or protected, or, they would, protect me from things as parents do. In that protection, I missed some things, let's just say. And it was only through the work that I do here that I began to peel away the lens so I can get a clearer visibility about what's going on. Here's a way to say it. You can't see what you're looking with, Now, if you walked over to a window and you looked out of the window, you're perceiving something. But if I asked you the question, have you ever seen the color of your own eyes? What would you say? You'd be like, well, my eyes are blue, or my eyes are brown, or my eyes are green. Fact is, you can't see the color of your own eyes. Someone else can, because you're looking through it, just like everybody. So your perception is no better than your programs, okay? What's a program? Well, here's an interesting thing that I have come to see. I used to think that whatever I saw, let's say, for example, what I watched my business partners do, or what I thought they did, or what I was watching take place in my family, or with my wife, Maria. I've been married 30 years. I was sure that whatever I thought I saw was the God's honest truth of what's going on. No, it's not true for me. It ain't true for you. It ain't true for everybody. It's no more reliable than the program you use to look at the world. And so what that led me to start to see is that I wasn't really having conversations, or at least not the ones that I thought I was having. I mean, I thought I was. I'd be like, how come people aren't, doing what I say, or why am I always running into the same problems, or why am I always getting pissed off, or why is everybody always angry around me, or why this and why that? For the simple reason that I couldn't see my own programming. And so the first tool that we teach is the tool of programming. It's the tool of, taking a look at what you got right now that you use to see the world. Check this out too. There's a video. We'll post the link for you guys to watch. It's on YouTube. It's on Netflix. I think it's even on Nova, Nova, because Nova is the science program that made it. It's called Memory Hackers. And it's fascinating because what the video does is it takes us through the last 50 so years of what we know about programming, except in the video, they never use the term programming, or they hardly use it. They use the term memory. But you can use those two terms interchangeably, because the way we navigate the world, as I said, is through our programs. But another way to say that is we navigate the world through our memories. That's really what memory does. It is the map that we use to figure out what's going on. And as the neuroscientists have become fond of saying, memory or programs are not just unreliable, they are inherently unreliable. And that unreliability means that for the most part, we may be, I think I can say that stronger, we probably are to a lesser, more likely extent, talking past each other. I told him so, or she told me this. So what we want to get you guys to see is that these conversations that are going on now in the world about, people saying, I'm tired. I don't, no. This is, I'm not going to live this way anymore. Enough is enough. We're going to have these conversations whether we like it or not. In fact, you're having them right now with the people in your life. It's just that now we're going to have one of those conversations where somebody says, I'm fucking tired. We're going to have this conversation. Now, our ability to get through this is what this summit is about, why we're putting on this program. Because the tool of programming, dealing with your own neural programming, is an essential first step. Here's why. Take me, for example. I'm just like everybody. I came out of my childhood with my own memories of what I thought that was like, which is the same thing to say as I came out with my own programs. And that's the set that I use to view the world. For the most part, it's locked and loaded by the time we're like 3 or 4 years old. I mean, I'm talking about the ones that are at the, let's just say, at the part of the our awareness that is the deepest. We can call that the things we believe are real. What we believe is real is it is based on those programs. Now let's see. I've got some people here. Let's see who's around that have some experience in dealing with programming, and let's see who we got here. Let's see if I can.
Here, I'll bite. Hi, everyone.
Go ahead. That's Vanessa.
Hi. So I wanted to actually ask John a question about this particularly subject, because we are talking about programming in the Office of Shaman. So we're talking about tools. And so, John, how would you say that the shamans would use this concept, and how did you see that concept in our lives in like today?
Oh my, you're a curious kid, aren't you?
Oh yeah.
What's up, John?
Well, let's see if I can. Hi, Ken. Let's see if I can answer some of this anyway for you, kid. Look, Lilly said it like this. He said, "We may be nothing more, nothing less than our programs." And he said, rather like a computer is rather nothing more, nothing less than its programs. And so I had to stop and say, okay, well, what are my programs, and is there anything that's not my programs? And sure enough, there was. So what I had to do was I had to say, well, what happens if I can find my programs and I can identify them as programs, and I decide to, let's say, put them to work doing things that I would normally think that I'm going to do in consciousness. Because that's how I was introduced into programming, was through mind control, which was a forerunner of EST, which was a forerunner of Landmark, which was a forerunner, etc. And so the thing is that I looked at that all differently than what those guys did, simply because I had different experiences. But it was simply a matter of saying, okay, if that's what we're looking at, if that's what we're trying to determine, or what we're trying to, well, let's say is real, let's put it that way, then how do we determine if it's real or not? I mean, what do we use? And when I started looking at that idea of saying, okay, what do we use? What I discovered is that we have no frickin' idea what we use. I mean, we don't have a clue. I mean, and that would be saying really nicely. We just don't. We don't know.
All right, John, are you saying that people don't know what is real? Is that the point here? Because they don't know what they're using to interpret real with?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Okay.
They just don't know. They're stupid. They just don't have. You know, who the hell has that? Who the hell has that experience, right? Nobody. Okay, and so here comes somebody around, and they say, okay, well, I'm having this experience here where I see this thing as a real thing, and you stop and say, okay, well, yeah, that's what they're doing, sure enough. Well, who am I to say that they're not having that experience? And how do I know that they're not having that experience? And that became quite a poser for me. See, I had to kind of figure that out. I had to figure it out in me, actually. And the more I looked at it, the more I thought, well, damn, I don't know if I know the answer to that really. And so as I began to examine those ideas in me and for me and so forth, I had to stop and say, all right, if I don't know what's going on here, I wonder if anybody else does. I mean, they might, because I could easily be the only dummy around. I mean, that's not been I've done that before. Pete and repeat, I know those guys pretty well. And so, you know, I had to stop and look at that and say, well, you know, if I'm doing something that's stupid, you know, it's not because I'm getting up in the morning and saying, well, I want to be that stupid. It's because I can't see it. I can't see it any other way. That's all. That's the only thing that can be happening there. And so the more I began to consider that was probably what really was happening, then the more I began to think, well, if that's really the thing that's happening, how do we get to this place where we can only see that thing? And I say, okay, It's because we are programmed to see things. But you can't see what you're looking with. Like I can't see the color of my eyes. I can't even, hell, I can't even see the whites of my eyes. I can't see my eyes at all. And so I'm looking with something. And so I have to say, what else am I looking with? And what else I'm looking with is I'm looking with these programs that I've written. And so I say, okay, when did I write these damn programs? And it turns out that when I wrote them was when events happened. And how I hold those programs in place is by remembering those events. And I try to remember them as faithfully as I can and as honestly as I can.
You're saying that your memories are what you use to perceive.
Oh, that's what I did. Yeah, well, I used to. I still do, but I do it way differently now than I used to. You know, now I remember things on purpose. Then I was being honest about it. I had no idea what the hell honest meant, but that's what I was doing. And so how I did it was I said, okay, you know, I remember that mother did this thing. She cooked this duck and it was terrible. And that proves that she was a bad cook. Well, she also made biscuits that would melt in your mouth. And so that proved that she was a good cook. So, okay, now what do we do? Well, it depends on the memory, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And so if I stopped and said, okay, well, she was a cook, instead of saying good and bad with it, and I took the dichotomies out of it, I started saying, wow, you know, that changes the color of all these memories I have. And that changed how I remembered them. And that changed how the program ran from that memory. And I said, well, fuck a duck.
Yeah. Yeah.
I did exactly those words. And I heard a voice in the back of my mind saying, quack. And so anyway, I kept on looking at that thing a little bit, and I said, all right, there's got to be a way for me or anybody else to be able to see what it is that we're looking with. I mean, we got to be able to examine that somehow. And so I started thinking, well, how would I do that?
How would you examine your programs? How would you examine memories? That's
how in the hell could I find those things?
That's
what would I want to find?
What would you look for?
Right. And so I got to thinking about, well, you know, what's a memory that I actually know there's a memory, and I know it's a real memory, because you know, we always do that thing. We always think we want to remember the real memories as though there's another kind for us. But that's what we always do, and we all do it, and it's like we're faithful to it and all. But what happens is that we kind of get sort of caught in it somewhat, you know, not a lot, just enough so that we can't see our way clear, really. Because what we do is we say, all right, I've got this real memory, which I may or may not actually have, but I think I do. And so I try to remember it as faithfully as I can. And in my faithful remembrance of this thing that I'm trying to remember faithfully, I forget that part of the reason why I'm remembering it that way is because, well, you know, it was convenient to me to remember it that way back then and still. And so I had changed the memory really to be convenient for me, not to be honest with me, even though I insisted that I was being honest. Well, that was a shock, Ken. I like to lost my marbles or something there. You know, I said, what the hell was that? That wasn't in the script there anywhere.
Yeah, that's interesting the way you're putting it. That that it was convenient, not necessarily honest. And I think what you're saying is you use the phrase real memory. Well, okay, it was a real memory in the sense that you remembered it. There was an event. But just because there was an event and there was a memory doesn't mean that what was going on was actually the way that you decided or perceived or wrote the code about.
Oh, hell no. I mean, why would I want to do that? I mean, you're talking about it like as if that I wasn't in charge of it. Of course I was. And so, you know, I could screw with it royally because it was my memory. And that came as a surprise that I did that, you know.
Yeah.
I was really quite surprised that, you know, that honest me was screwing around with even my own memories. It was like, whoa, hey, whoa, stop this now. That can't be true. But unfortunately, I guess maybe it was true. And so when I looked at it really in the light of day, one of the things I had to come to grips with was I had to say, well, you know, this thing that's actually true for me here is probably true for a lot of people, that we can't see it, and we cherry pick what we want to remember.
We cherry pick it. It has to fit. You know, there's this psychologists use the term cognitive dissonance to address something like, if not very much like what you're talking about. If we don't think it fits, fuck it, throw it out. You know, it's not. Yeah.
Well, we all do that though. See, but we can't remember that we're doing it. I mean, it's not we get up in the morning and say, well, we're going to do this, and we're nasty about it or anything. It's not anywhere close to that. We don't see it coming. We don't know that we're doing that. We really don't. And so it comes as a shock to us. I think anybody I've ever seen that came to that realization said, oh man, how in the hell did I not see that I was doing this thing to me?
Dude, you're preaching to the choir.
Yeah, well.
You know that. Yeah. I've been floored at times. I've been like, that's what I'm doing, really?
Yeah, well, that happens.
Yeah, it happens. It's the nature of programming. It's the nature of memory.
Yeah, it is. And I don't think there's anything untoward about it. I think I kind of enjoy it, but it's still surprising to me that I can fool myself. I have that capacity to fool myself about my memories, or even about what I think is okay. You know, to be able to question something and say, all right, well, is that how I'm looking at it really worthwhile? I mean, you know, why am I looking at this thing this way? What's going on in me that allows me to say what the hell am I looking at? Why am I looking at it that way?
Wait, dude, I've got 30 years of business experience. That phrase, that question you just posed, is one that I almost never hear. No, almost never.
No, I know. I surprised myself with it. I got to tell you, I turned white. I used to be Jamaican.
Okay.
All right. Well, I lied a little bit there somewhere. Oh, but not about the programming part. Okay, the Jamaican part maybe, but the programming part no. But here's the reality of it. As I began to realize that my programming was actually more in charge of me than I was, and really, what was my programming? Like, for instance, I thought of programming being, okay, well, I've been programmed to eat red meat, for instance. That's a stupid ass program illustration, but as an example, because that's all I did at those days, was do stupid ass program. And so I looked at that and said, well, if that's the case, then I can program myself to eat red meat. The only thing is that that wasn't the program. The program was that I thought that red meat was part of a healthy diet, even though I didn't know that was something that I thought was true because Mom had told me when I was like 5.
Okay.
And sure enough, I remembered that honestly in my brain. That Mom had told me that, and that I had agreed with her to do that. But I didn't remember the actual event.
I get what you're pointing out is that the event is like the genesis, the source, the birth of that memory of the program.
Right. And so what I ended up having to do is I ended up having to strap around that program. It just didn't work. And so rather than remember it all the way back and rewrite the whole thing, which I've done with some other programs that I really wanted to understand, I just strapped around it. I just made a Wheatstone bridge and put a lower value resistor in the strap around circuit.
Yeah, those familiar with silicone kind of programming and engineer types would probably be familiar with that. But I think what you're saying is you've created a path of less resistance.
Yes, yes. If you and that's all you're doing. That's all that a programmer is going to do. The program is still going to stay there, as far as I can tell. But that doesn't mean you have to use it the way that that you wrote it. I mean, just because that slot there and you learned that the slot was there doesn't mean you named it properly.
Yeah.
And we were kids. We didn't know what the hell we were doing when we were naming these programs, and we're little kids. All of us were. We didn't know. But we're not little kids anymore, and so now we can be honest with each other and say, look, this is a thing. This is how it works. Now, why do you want to do that? Because what that does is that tells me who I am. That says, you're just like your dad, John. I mean, not only do you look like him and walk like him and eat like him and look at all that other stuff, but you think like him too. You've made some modifications, and he'd be happy with the modifications that you've made. You actually think like he does, because you based your thoughts on his thoughts. You learn to play chess from him. You learn to drive from him. You learn to think about the year from him.
Yeah.
Those are all programs and things that I think are real. And so if I stop and look at those things and say, those are things that I really can't change. Those are actual events in my life. I can't change that. Dad had that influence on me. I'm not sure I want to change that. He spent a lifetime learning that influence, and his dad had spent a lifetime learning that influence. And so I think that I probably can spend a lifetime improving it if I can. They did. I don't think that there's anything wrong with anybody doing that. I don't care if they're black or yellow or if they're, hell, I don't even care if they're from New Jersey, like Edith. I mean, Elise.
Hey, I'm from Jersey too.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I know we're understated. It's a pretty handy tool.
Yes, it is, because the thing is that if I know what my programming is, then I pretty much have defined who I am, and I can be at one with that. I can say, okay, you know what? These are the influences on my life that I've decided I'm going to use in my life as a thing. And that's a good thing for me too. Now, it's not the only way I can go at it, but it's a way. And so, I don't know if even the other ways I know about going at this thing still end up talking about programming at the end of the day. I mean, that's really what it's about. Even though, no matter what you name it, it's still that's what it is. So, Vanessa, did that answer your question?
Yeah, it did.
Oh, well, good. Then I'll shut up.
Well, I have another question, and maybe you already answered it while you were answering that, but how would programming work for relationships in any type, like businesses and personal?
Man, to begin with, I have a set of programs that I think are required for a relationship, and you have the same thing, and Ralph has the same thing, and Pam has the same thing, and Annie has the same thing, and Greg does, and so forth. Everybody has that thingy that we think that these are the requirements for what we need in our life. That's what we do. And when we have a relationship, people are supposed to understand the stuff, or they don't fit in our relationship. Well, and that's also true. Now, sometimes we're silly about that, and that's also true. but mostly we're pretty serious because those are things that are important to us that we bitch about mostly. Not always, but mostly. Everybody knows what they bitch about that doesn't mean anything. So don't ask me if that's what it is. Yes, it is. You know that already. I'll just tell you straight up that thing you're asking about as being bitchy about, yes, it is, period. Okay, so here's the deal. For me to understand how to be in a relationship, I have to understand that the other guy is programmed and that that's just fine. He has a right or an obligation to live within what his programs are. What my challenge is to find out how it is that I can understand what his programs are and how his programs work, so that I can figure out how to communicate with him, although we're not at those two steps as yet. But that's the answer to your question. Programming not only lets me see who I am and what I'm doing, but it lets me see who the other guy is and what they're talking about, what their programs say.
Yeah. That's why we start with the tool of programming. It's
where anybody starts, I think, Ken. You know, I don't think you can do anything else. I think that you have to figure that out. I think that you have to, like it says there, you got to answer for yourself how programming works.
Yeah.
Because that's how you learn how your thinking works.
Yeah. We'll get into things like considering other points of view after we do programming, and then we'll talk about communication after that. We're all doing those things already.
Oh, yeah.
They're being directed or influenced by our programming. Why not start and figure out what I'm saying? And I think you say who I am or who we are, and then reach across and be able to consider what somebody else is saying. I don't know any other way to get up to a place where I can find somebody who will agree with me about anything without considering that. What do you think? Okay. Folks have any questions? How you doing, Pat Jones? You around for a chat?
I'm here, Ken.
How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Oh, good. I'll make a quick introduction that for those that weren't on last night, I'm from New Jersey. So is Pat Jones. I own a float center. I'm building a new float center. Pat is the architect on that, and he's got some experience floating, and he's also been considering the things that John and I are talking about. I think you're kind of in an event now where you're looking at old memories and old programs and deciding whether it works for you and modifying it into something that you think works better. Right? Can you?
Yeah, well, I'm finding, Ken, that a lot of what I'm seeing just doesn't work for me. Well, it works for me, but it doesn't work in the way I'd like it to, that's for sure.
Yeah. Can you relate to what John said about finding an event and then taking a look at that event, and in particular what you decided or what code or program you wrote about that event?
Well, I can go back. Similar to John's experience, something that I've been thinking about recently is, my mother as well. And, my mother grew up with a family of 7. She had 7 siblings. She was one of 8, I guess. And grew up on a farm. And, it was rather difficult to feed all those mouths at one time. So, when I grew up, I got great meals. I can relate to John, or, well, maybe not relate, I don't know about the duck that his mother made, but, my mother made some great dishes. And it was all proportioned out very well for myself and my 3 siblings and my father. And somewhere along the line, I decided my mother never fed me enough. So now I look the way I do. And where I'm going through now is I'm realizing, my mother was really onto something. She was definitely doing something right. My whole program that I grew up with, or the programming that I created for myself that said my mother didn't feed me enough growing up, well, it was a load of garbage. Just did not work for me. So now I go back and take a look at it and reprogram it. That's one of the things I'm working on right now.
Okay. Thanks for sharing.
Sure, no problem.
Thanks
for asking.
What do you notice? What's like palpable or observable as you start to engage in the tool or start to use the tool of programming?
What am I starting to notice? Well, I guess what I'm really noticing is, how wrong I was about a lot of my memories growing up. You know as well as I do, through my rewrite and whatnot, I placed a lot of blame on my mother and my sisters for the things that I did. They had nothing to do with the things that I did. It was all made up in my head. So what I'm noticing is all these points where, I don't know if I can say, does it make sense that maybe my program is failing me and it just isn't working?
Oh.
Go ahead.
Okay, Pat, this is Terry. It's like, it's not so much that it's a right or wrong, it's just you were a kid. You didn't have a lot of life experience.
That's true, exactly.
So, we all have those things. I had experiences where I thought, I'm right about this. I'm smarter than mom or whatever. It's like, well, I was 4 when I decided that, what did I know?
Yeah. Well, you're always going to be right, aren't you?
Well, when you're 4, probably. But when you're 4, we learn about things like right or wrong because that's a shortcut. But, right or wrong are dichotomies. They don't really exist.
They don't exist.
Yeah, they exist, but they're not opposites. They're not. So right. I think when we sort through this, I kind of like this thing about painting things with a different color. How can we paint with a color that brings in the richness of what we learn as we've gotten older and talk to more people and get different perspectives?
Yeah.
Makes life a lot more fun, doesn't it?
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Yeah, I grew up in a family where rights and wrongs had a let's just say a high value on them. I've come to see that what do I get by being right? What did I ever get by being right? I'm pretty sure most of what I got was I bought an argument. As Terry said, yeah, there are things that are right. There just are things, but to tie them together with wrongs and to then engage in arguments just for the sake of rights and wrongs, it wasn't something that gave any real benefit to me.
That's good that you touch on that, Ken, the rights and wrongs. Paul, are you available to hop on?
I'm here, Vanessa. How you doing?
Hi, Paul. So, Paul, can you introduce yourself a little bit just so people know where you're coming from? And the reason why I'm pulling you up about talking about programming, because I know that you run a company and that this is one of the biggest tools that you use with your team, right?
Sure. Yeah. So my name is Paul Grenzi. I founded and am president of a company called Red Key Solutions based out of White Plains, New York. We manage technology for other companies. And I've been studying this material now since probably about 2014. And Vanessa, to your point, programming is something that I pay attention to in myself, as everyone's been talking about here, because once you do that, you can be one with yourself, which is a far smoother form of operation than having internal conflicts. Anyone that's ever felt an internal conflict will agree with that idea. But with regards to my company, I not only listen to what people say, but I pay attention to what their communications do. And that might sound like a simple idea, but it encompasses a much more significant way to interact with the people around you. So I don't pay attention to what people say. I pay attention to the effects of what they do.
Okay.
And for running a company, that's, as you can imagine, pretty effective for holding people accountable. Let's say it that way.
Okay. And for some of you that haven't, that missed yesterday and stuff, we were talking about a playing field. And Paul, you actually have a great explanation about the playing field. And we are going to get to more of that, but there's a part of that, what you're saying, like you pay attention to the communication. And so that's what John wrote in his book about there's 8 tools and 8 functions that help have a better communication.
Yeah, why don't we maybe just, Vanessa, say a little bit more about this thing for the people who were new, and we'll build this thought over the next 6 weeks, but let's introduce, they didn't hear it yesterday, about what's this thing called playing field? What the hell's that about?
Yeah, so, well, Paul has that image. Just so people can understand, like, if you're not communicating and you're using, like, your program, you don't know what your programming is. I mean, do you actually know what you're communicating? So in that image that Paul has, he can, like, show what that actually looks like.
Okay. And you asking, would you like Paul to...
I don't think I'm asking, I think I'm, like, telling him.
kind of leading me in by my nose on that one. Okay. Well, thank you, Terry. That's the static image. Do you want me to share my screen? I'll try and show the dynamic image just to make it a little more fluid for folks.
There you go.
All right. Let's try that. Okay. Are you seeing the 2-dimensional image right now?
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. So this is the original graphic of the playing field. And this is a graphic representation or a map of basically everything we're going to talk about, right, Ken, over the course of this entire book.
Yeah, it's a way to pay attention to what we're doing, what other people are doing. Why? Because this series we're doing is about getting along. And for this point, at this moment, just take my word for it. What Paul is showing you is a graphical representation of getting along with people.
Fair enough. There's 2 things here that people might immediately be able to appreciate. The first we've already used, which is the phrase be one, or being at one with yourself. Okay, you'll see that that's represented up here in this upper left-hand corner. There's also one down on the lower right, but let's just stay on the top right for now. And the other thing that people will recognize is an agreement, which is here in the middle with this purple overlap. So this, again, is a 2-dimensional representation of how to deploy and use the ideas in this book. Well, what we did recently was we expanded this playing field into a 3-dimensional construct, which, as you guys can see, shares some similarities with the two-dimensional image. You can still see the B1 up here in the corner. You can see the B1 down here on the right. You can also see that agreement is in the middle. And there's a bunch of other things on here which we will absolutely unpack and expand and demonstrate for you in real time on these calls. But let's just take a little look and see if you can get a little feel for what's actually going on here. So that agreement zone here is also represented as the overlap. What's more complicated about this one, though, is we're using three-dimensional images. I apologize, I'm still getting used to this tool. So let me move it around here. So what we're using in place of those two triangles are these things called oloids, which are just so interesting. They are three-dimensional structures, as you can kind of see right here. And I'm using them to represent the triangles in the two-dimensional form. And what's really interesting about them is they also have exactly the same surface area of a sphere. This shape, believe it or not, if you printed it out on a 3D printer, which people do for fun, I guess, but you can roll it down a table and it will roll with a single point of contact on the surface, just like a sphere. Very interesting stuff. Yeah. Let me just demonstrate one other piece to this. So within this image, the bigger image before that I showed everybody, are these two oloids. Now this, what's different about this one is it's an out of balance picture. So this is what happens when a person's B1 function, which we were talking about earlier, is, you know, when we're at one with ourselves and we've dealt with our programming. When that is an issue for someone and it's not flowing the way that it needs to, this is what happens to the amount of agreement that two individuals can have, is it gets drastically reduced because it no longer overlaps. If you come back here, sorry, spin us around here. Sorry if I'm giving anybody vertigo. So this is an example of a very successful set of communications between two people that understand who they are and what they're saying. Neither person in this example is suffering from misfiring programming. And the result is a maximized agreement. And you know, in the world of business, that's something that we're looking to do all the time.
Yeah. This depicts two people. Why? Because, well, it takes two to tango. Agreements, that's what agreements are. Agreements between people.
Yeah, that's right.
Or two firms.
Groups, yeah.
As in two businesses.
Correct.
Or opponents in a courtroom.
Or opponents in a courtroom. Yeah.
I mean, this applies to every single walk of life. It's not restricted in any way. And with that, Ken, let me build it back to you.
Okay. Well, we're building. Thanks, Paul. We're building a model toward that. Just a model. Yeah, that thing that you saw, that's a model. Are there other ways to represent getting along with people in agreement? I would venture a guess that they probably are. But take it from someone like me, I didn't have a model to begin with, and this is a pretty handy one. You have someone or two businesses or two and wife or two whatever's on either side of that. And they're having a conversation, just like we're having a conversation now. Paul and Vanessa and John's point about programming is, what kind of conversation am I having with people in my life? What am I, am I even seeing what I say? And if I can't see what I say, can I really see who I am? And if I can't see what I say and who I am, can I really see who they are? And if I can't see who they are or what they're saying, all this is to say, folks, is that, like, I'll just tell you that as Paul showed with that kind of funky one that didn't really line up well, yeah, the opportunity for agreement becomes much more well, elusive, something that you might not be able to find until you start to pay attention and first deal with your own programming.
Well, and it also, like, in the, in the relationship realm, it doesn't say like, was it me or was it him? Or it's not me, it's you. And so you really don't know, right? Because you really don't know who you are, and you're like expecting the person to be this fantasy that you expected, but there's not there. But we'll get into that later, though. But,
Okay.
but yeah.
What do you think, Vanessa? Terry introduced the word blame, the concept of blame. Is that something worth elaborating on at this point? I mean, we're going to be dealing with it in programming either today or tomorrow. You want to say a thing about that?
I mean, I guess that's in the introduction of if, I'm blaming the other person for how I feel instead of understanding like my programming.
Yeah. Yeah. In other words, it can't be me. It must be them.
Yeah.
I've done that my whole life. Yeah, it can't. It must be them.
Yeah.
It's like whenever you see either the problem or the solution, as in the other guy, fix it for me. Oh, you're my savior, or you're the problem. I mean, when I've had those kinds of thoughts, then I never wasn't looking at me or my part of it.
Yeah.
I was looking for something out there.
They just don't understand you, right, Terry?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That was the thought I would have. Yeah. If they just tried harder.
So Terry, you ran a float center years ago. Vanessa, you're currently running a float center. So do I. And in doing that, people come in and people complain of stress because, well, people got stress. Everybody's got stress. And I always ask people where their stress comes from. And I don't know if your answers comport with the ones I get. I'm guessing they do. Predictably, I get 3 typical answers. What if I ask someone, well, where's that stress come from that you're complaining about? They tell me things like relationships, job, money, kids, things like that. All, those predictable kind of things. But then pointing out to them that that's impossible, it just can't be, is usually the point where I am sometimes met with a blank stare because it sounds very possible. I'll sometimes walk them through an example and say, well, imagine if you and I have the same job. I'll ask them what their job is. What's your job? They said, well, I'm a office manager. And, I said, okay, so say I'm office manager alongside of you. Who's our boss? I say, well, our boss is the chief operating officer. Okay, so we both have the same job operating, both office manager, and we report to the chief operating officer. We sit next to each other. We do the same things for all intents and purposes. Our jobs are the same. I can come home at the end of the day and say, wow, this is great. I've got a great boss. I got great colleagues. It's a great job. You might come home at the end of the day saying, motherfucker, I can't believe these people, they don't understand me. It's a good way that I point out to people that despite what you think in terms of where your stress or your frustrations come from, if you point it outside, you're blaming. And if you're blaming, where do you go from there? You've already given it away. You've already said what's going on for me is not something that I generate, it's them. And every time you do that, in its big fat blamey form, or even if it's tiny subtly kind of forms, because they come in more subtle forms too, these blame things, you've set up for yourself a non-starter to even deal with programming. Think about that. Tool of programming. Can you really do programming? Can you even begin this skill set if your starting point has any flavor of what's going on for me is because of you? Just consider that as it's impossible. What do you think? Do you see it that way, Vanessa, Terry?
Yeah, I think our biocomputers respond the way we program them to respond. I mean, just like we were talking earlier, we wrote these codes when we were kids about this is what's going on. This is you know, this is what's real. It's a threat or it's fun or whatever. However, we think it's real. And it's like if you have two laptops sitting next to each other, one laptop isn't making the other one do what it does. you each uses their own programming.
Yeah.
You know, so what we're no different.
Yeah. Any other comments and questions while we're wrapping up tonight? Anybody? I think what we're going to stay in programming tomorrow. What we're going to do in this series is we're going to stay in each chapter for 2 days. You'll notice that each of these tools, in fact, when we get to the second half of the book, each of the corresponding functions are broken into 2 parts. We've got, you know, a little bit of, let's just call it information or explanation about what's the source of what's the authoritative part of this. And then after that first part of each of these chapters, there's a story part from a fictitious guy named Bob that the teacher is talking to. But I've come to see that in some degree, we're all Bobs or Bobettes. Okay, so Terry, tomorrow we'll stay in programming?
Yeah, I think that's good. I think we got a little more.
Yep. I think what we'll do tomorrow is we'll introduce some kinds of programming. In particular, we'll introduce something called a goals means approach to programming, which breaks down this skill, this tool of programming into facets, into component parts that you'll see it becomes a pretty potent tool for dealing with your own programming.
Yeah, and if anybody wants to post a question on that Slack channel, we can either answer it there or we'll bring it up tomorrow night.
Yep. Great. Well, okay then. So how about we meet at 8 p.m. again tomorrow night? I want to thank all the panelists and all the attendees. I see some new faces here. So I hope you guys stick around. It's going to be interesting and participate. I can't emphasize this enough. These concepts for me gelled and solidified more often than not when I asked the question, because when I didn't, I was making an assumption that I knew something, and then I trotted it out there only to find out that there might have been a gap or a hole, or I didn't even understand it. So ask questions. Yeah, I welcome them. Sound good?
Sounds good, Ken.
Thanks, Paul, and thanks everybody.
Good night. See you tomorrow.
Yeah, see you tomorrow.
Good night, guys.